I'm Lexicon and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about child and teen villains and why I find them so compelling. I have two examples from shows to talk about today in particular, as well as one of my own. Let's get started. The Collector was the newest of these three and the one to inspire this video in the first place. He takes the form of a young child with markings reminiscent of the sun and moon, and their mind seems to be that of a very young, naive child. They're playful, desperate for companionship, and lack the maturity and experience one would need to be empathetic. It's exactly what you would think of if you tried to imagine a small child with cosmic amounts of power and no true understanding of what it means to die. The Collector underlines how child villains can be perfectly good people, and more than capable of change, but have good intentions that can quickly sour because they can't understand the consequences. To him, everyone is little more than a toy or a couple of kids on the playground who are just being mean because they won't play with him. Hundreds of thousands of years imprisoned away, lonely, unable to contact anyone. It made a child so scared of being lonely again that he's turned possessive and obsessive in his quest for friendship. And yet, you can't really be angry with him for what he's doing, or at least objectively angry, because they're just a child and they don't know any better. As soon as he gets positive reinforcement, he tries to do better. His face heel turn is immediate, and yet not unbelievable at all. All the Collector wants is someone to be kind to him, to be a genuine friend who doesn't lie to him. All he wants is truth and friendship. Two idealistic goals often attributed to the heroes of the story, but that, mixed with this horrifying amounts of cosmic power, makes this child into a villain worthy of going up against our teenage and adult protagonists. Old versus young has been a common trope in fiction for some time. The protagonists will oftentimes be the young ones, and we do see this in the Owl House too. The Collector isn't the main villain of the series, rather more of a plot device and catalyst than anything else. But during his brief stint as the villain, they serve as a subversion of these particular expectations. The heroes going against them are much older, at least psychologically and physically. Most child villains that I can think of have historically been either in the horror genre or pitted against others of their age, but it seems to be an emerging new trend in action-adventure and fantasy. I've touched on Varian's villain arc already in this video here, but I couldn't reasonably leave him out of this conversation. He clocks in at 14 years old at the beginning of his villain arc, which, while it might not exactly be a child, it's definitely a young villain. Unlike the Collector, Varian is driven by the desire for revenge. He is a young person lashing out at someone he can blame for a grave misfortune that has befallen him and his father, who he loves. If you look back at his arc, you can see where his bitterness might have come from. He's left alone to fend for himself after a family tragedy, denied help by a castle full of people, and thrown back into the snow to do a kingdom-wide trek in a blizzard. While the bigger picture is, well, a lot bigger, that's what Varian sees, and that's what sets him off thinking he can fix things for himself. He's still driven by somewhat immature thought patterns and impulses, despite his very apparent genius, as well as a blinding love and guilt regarding his father. Setting a bubbly young boy down the path of villainy requires something that hits him hard, and losing his last remaining parent did just that. He and the Collector share something in that. They both put full trust into and idolize certain people in their lives until the eventual betrayal comes. Whether that betrayal was intentional or out of sheer necessity, it has the same effect. The relationship they used to have with that person is soured, and the child turns on who he thought was supposed to be a trustworthy adult figure. That's another thing I think is interesting about young villains. They might resonate so well with some people because of that very sense of disillusionment with adults, and those who might seek to manipulate them, or not come to the rescue when everything beforehand suggests that they will. Varian has wholehearted faith that Rapunzel will help him, and at the very last second, once he's put all his eggs into that basket and thrown down all his cards, that plan fails because Rapunzel says no. He can't take a step back and think about her priorities. He's 14, and his dad is dying. Betrayal of trust is huge to anybody, but especially to a kid who has no preconceived possibility of that happening. They put way too much trust into one person, and whether that person is an evil, conniving beast like Bellos, or a well-meaning person who just can't help in the moment like Rapunzel, it still shatters their entire worldview. And when someone's worldview is shattered, and they're left alone to reform it by themselves in a pit of anger, well, you get a young villain who will stop at nothing to get back at whoever did it. Wow, that got kind of heavy. But it does lead me into my next section, which will be a little more self-indulgent. I hope you still enjoy it. Watching Tangled must have given me serious inspiration for a child villain, because that's exactly what I did when I started writing my project, The Crimson Circle. Ama is one of the main character's sister. She's a blood mage and the heir to her mother's fortune and cult following, and, you guessed it, she becomes the villain of the series. But how? Pretty simple to guess that too. She carries on the pattern of betrayal and subsequent vault of villainy. While I started doing the series with her turning 13 at first, I realized my goals for this series were going to be a little too far on the dark side to keep her that young. Eventually, she moves up to going from 15 to 17 through the course of the story, but she still counts as a young villain. She's both immature and too grown for her age, which is the case of a lot of kids growing up with PTSD. And that's why I feel she makes an interesting villain, at least I hope so. Like with the other two, you almost can't help but root for a kid just trying to grow and follow their own ambitions, even if it's just in the back of your mind. You can't help but want to see the Collector happy. You can't help but want to see Varian get his dad back. You can't help but feel for Ama and want her to be free from her mother's abuse. At least that's what I'm going for anyway. We'll see when I get more eyes on the story. But she's another reason I wanted to do this topic in the first place. The concept of child villains against people much older than them, and yet holding their ground anyway to force themselves into being taken seriously, is such an interesting and compelling concept. And I won't speak in general terms here, it does speak to me at a personal level, to be able to see corruption in an adult you were supposed to look up to. While I never did and never would lash out at some of the adults who abused their power at my expense when I was younger, it is kind of validating to see these characters doing the same. To write one is even better sometimes, because I get to experience that feeling of finally having clawed your way up through the top like Ama. Child villains subvert stereotypes in an interesting and compelling way, and I hope to see more in the future. I think they have a lot of untapped potential in both storytelling and subtextual messages. While it's great to have these young versus old and young hero tropes, I think treating kids as their own people with their own emotions beyond positive ones can be a really good conversation starter. After all, kids deal with heavy things too, like depression, PTSD, grief, etc. It could be a good thing to open these topics with children and discuss why these characters did what they did. It would be a good exercise in empathy and self-reflection, and get them thinking about how they affect their environment and how they can work on their own reactions to things. Or, on the flip side, it can teach them that sometimes, no, adults are not always right just because they're older. You could argue that that is already filled by the young heroes versus old villains trope, but I think this particular approach opens up a lot more nuance. When you introduce an adult villain, you're not introducing an adult most of the time. You're just introducing this abstract, evil person. This kid is going to trust most of the adults in their life, speaking generally and under normal circumstances, of course. By introducing these themes of adult betrayal, you're introducing the concept of someone who may be in a position of authority over them, say like an abusive teacher, and saying, hey, think critically about this. Is this an Edelin or a Bellos? And in Varian's case, it could get them to say, well, this is unfair to me and I'm in a lot of pain, but so might the other person be. Maybe I should think about it first before I make a decision. And I do understand that this could lead to some unsavory places because, well, kids are kids and they don't have very good critical thinking skills. After all, they don't know what's going on and they can easily make mistakes. But that's why engaging in these stories and talking with kids about the subject matter is really important, I think. You could guide them in this thinking and, when situations arise, make comparisons so they have an easier time seeing the real-life big picture. Even if they can't understand these concepts quite yet in a smoothly, real-life applicable way, it's opening their minds to nuanced conflict resolution and empathetic thinking. I will say that I'm absolutely no expert in childcare, and all of this has been pure opinion, just food for thought. But what do you think? Am I completely wrong about this, or do you think watching shows with child villains could be helpful? Or do you not care about this part at all and just like the story from an adult perspective? After all, even when you're not learning, it can be really entertaining to see these types of things turned on their head and re-explored. Anyway, if you enjoyed your time here, please consider leaving a like or subscribing for more art and storytelling content. Thank you for watching and have a fantastic day.